I did a search on Google. I asked it, who is widely considered to be the greatest 20th century composer? And the top result, the AI response, was Igor Stravinsky. Certainly there are other candidates that you can debate, but the point is that Igor Stravinsky is always in the conversation of greatest 20th century composer. But there was another composer when Stravinsky was 27 years old, and he was looked upon more favorably at the time, and that was Anatoly Lyadov. Well, there's a reason that they have in common why Stravinsky is much more famous and highly regarded today. As you listen to their story and a few other similar stories today, ask yourself, who will you be when opportunity strikes? Will you be Lyadov or Stravinsky? Whether you're a self-taught musician, have a teacher, or you're already a professional, this show is meant to help you with knowledge, mindset, craft, and strategies to improve your overall musicianship so that you can become the best musician you can be, regardless of your goals. Welcome to Musicianship Mastery. Hello and welcome to episode number 143. My name is David Lane and it is great to be with you once again. So before I get into the story that I'm going to share, the featured story for this episode, I have to offer the disclaimer that like so many stories that we hear in various areas of history, it's not like there's any evidence to dispute it, but there's inconclusive evidence that all of the attributes of the story are true. But it's been true enough that I have read it in at least one biography of Stravinsky, and I've heard it in multiple places. So it's not like I heard this one time and it stuck in my head. I've heard this at least 4 different sources before. So whether or not it's 100% true or partially true, I'm not sure, but I think there's a great lesson in there anyway. So who was Anatoly Lyadov? Lyadov was an accomplished composer for his time. Specifically, he was very highly embraced by the one generation older composers known as the Russian Five, with the more famous members of that group being Mussorgsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, and Borodin. So specifically within Russia at the time, he was very highly regarded. And he was also a professor in St. Petersburg. Among his many students included Sergei Prokofiev, although that's a story right there. Prokofiev was not the most accommodating student. He was very rebellious, but Lyadov had an influence. In 1909, the ballet impresario Sergei Diaghilev, whose Russian ballet was located in Paris, commissioned several composers to arrange music originally written by Chopin, arrange it for orchestra to be used in a ballet. That ballet is known as Les Sylphides. And again, that was in 1909. Let's flash forward 1 year to 1910. Sergei Diaghilev approaches Lyadov to write the music for his latest ballet, which is The Firebird. Lyadov was the first choice for the composer, and this is the part that gets disputed. We don't really know if he accepted the commission or not. But I'm going to operate on the assumption that it is true that he really did accept the commission, because based on what you hear next, it would be in his best interest to say that he never did accept the commission. And maybe it was a case of it was a verbal agreement and maybe contracts weren't signed. I don't know how music business was done in that part of the world in 1910. And we don't know how much time has gone by after the commission. Was it 2 weeks later? Was it 4 weeks later? I'm not sure, but it was at least 2 weeks. It might have been more than a month. Diaghilev checks in with Lyadov to see how he's doing, and it's not going great. He's either only obtained the manuscript paper or he's just started putting bar lines in it. Basically, he hasn't written a single note. And I don't know what the timeline was when Lyadov accepted it, but he didn't have like years to fulfill this. It had to be written that year. Kind of put this in perspective, one parallel you could say to this is like film composers typically get, for a feature film, anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks to score the entire movie, which is about as much music as there is in a ballet. You cannot afford to waste a single day if you get such an opportunity. If you accept a commission, I don't care what day you accept it, I don't care what time of day it is. If you're going to get it done on time and have room for revisions that might be requested and so forth, you need to get as much done as you can before you go to bed that night. So a minimum of 2 weeks has gone by, and Lyadov has not written a note. Diaghilev is not at all pleased with this, and he's panicking, and he's like, I can't trust that he's going to come through. So I've got to find somebody else. And somehow he was referred to this promising composer. He was a student of Rimsky-Korsakov, or a former student of Rimsky-Korsakov. He was 27 years old. He'd written a handful of pieces that people had noticed, but he had never written anything as big as a ballet. But Diaghilev took a chance on him, and Stravinsky pounced. He wrote with a fury, and he wrote not one of the pieces that people refer to as a mark of the genius of Stravinsky, as in what he would do just a few years later, but a very well-crafted, original, very entertaining score that is regarded as one of the most fun pieces to listen to from the early 20th century. And that solidified his partnership with Diaghilev, and he wrote several more ballets. In fact, there's about a 4-year period where Stravinsky wrote 3 ballets. And I don't think in the world of classical music you can find more dramatic growth and change within a composer than what happens in those 3 ballets. You have the Firebird, which I know people will argue with me about this, but I think that Stravinsky was influenced by like French Impressionism at that time. You do hear a little bit of Ravel and Debussy, not to the point to where you'd say that sounds like them, but you can tell that he was definitely influenced by that music when he was writing the Firebird. And I don't know how he could not have been at that age and writing for a ballet in Paris. And then he wrote Petrushka, which added a lot of elements. I would say Petrushka doesn't sound like really anything that you've heard before. And then, of course, I don't think we need to talk much about The Rite of Spring, which followed, which was completely revolutionary at the time. But all of that started, and here's the main point of the story and the main point of this episode. It started when luck and preparation had a meeting. It was lucky for Stravinsky that Lyadov did not come through. It's a great what if in history. What if Lyadov, assuming he did accept the commission, what if he had been as hard of a worker as Stravinsky was and fulfilled that commission? When would have Stravinsky gotten his break, and how would we have ever known about him? I mean, it's not a guarantee that he would. His energy and his drive was so great, it's hard to imagine that he wouldn't have broken through some other time. But probably, almost certainly not in the way that he did with The Rite of Spring. Because that took the partnership that he created, that he was able to get with Diaghilev, that happened 2 ballets previous. Stravinsky probably would not have written that music had he not had that story as a reference. And he might not have had that story if he hadn't been with this particular ballet impresario. So let me tell you another similar story. The year is 1969, and there's a movie called The Reivers. It's based off of a William Faulkner novel starring Steve McQueen. And the composer for that film is Lalo Schifrin. He'd done a lot of great television work for things like Mission Impossible and this other TV show called Mannix. He also had done a few film scores to great acclaim, including Steve McQueen's film from the previous year called Bullet. Now, as far as I could tell, Schifrin had never written music for anything like the subject matter or the tone of The Reivers. And unlike Lyadov, this was not a case of him not getting to work. It was that he really wasn't the right fit for the project and for the particular director, which I believe his name was Mark Rydell. So this is a common story you don't often hear about unless you really get into the nitty-gritty of film music history. But Lalo Schifrin was let go. A lot of great composers have been let go from films. And sometimes nothing comes of it. Like one of the most famous cases is that Alex North was let go in 1968 from the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he was replaced with a composite score of existing classical pieces. So, like, nobody's career took off because Alex North was dismissed. But someone's career did take off because Lala Schifrin was dismissed from the Reavers. The composer that was chosen instead was someone that the director had worked with before on a Western and had gotten along well with, even though this composer had not done anything that was really remarkable up to this point. And this composer had been working consistently for at least 12 years. And he had previously gone by the name Johnny Williams, but recently was being credited as John Williams. And John Williams was able to deliver a score that was exactly what the director was looking for. And I have to say, in my opinion, there's nothing particularly remarkable about that score. It's a score that works for the film. It's got some very nice moments, but when you start comparing that to the work that John Williams has done over his whole career, I don't really think there's that much special about it. But here's the big point to that story. He got that opportunity because it didn't work out for someone else. He did a good job. And then, while it was in the theater, a USC film student by the name of Steven Spielberg saw it. And while I might not have been particularly impressed with that score, Spielberg certainly was. And that collaboration with that director, Mark Rydell, in 1969, that gave John Williams another opportunity in 1972 to do another Western called The Cowboys. And Spielberg noticed that too. Now a graduate, now one film into his career, he had done a television movie called Duel. And he was ready to begin his first feature film called The Sugarland Express, or his first feature film for the theater. And what he heard in The Cowboys and what he heard in The Reavers, which was all thanks to that by chance opportunity and then taking advantage of it, well, that led to the legendary collaboration that moviegoers have enjoyed for 50 years. Collaboration that has produced Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Indiana Jones, E.T., Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, and so on and so on. So here's one more story that I'll tell you from the world of music, and this was very well represented in the movie Maestro that came out, I believe, in 2023. Last check, you can find it on Netflix. I don't know if it's still there. The conductor of the New York Philharmonic at the time, Bruno Walter, he was very sick on the day of a concert. And that morning, the assistant conductor, who had actually never done a concert with them before, he was called and told that he needed to conduct that night. Not only had he not done a concert before, he had never actually rehearsed with the New York Philharmonic. He was on the staff, he was on call, but he had never rehearsed anything, much less the concert that was to happen that night. And it was a concert that included some very demanding pieces, such as Wagner's overture to Meistersinger, Richard Strauss's Don Quixote, and a few other pieces. And this conductor had to, with no rehearsal, go to Carnegie Hall and conduct the New York Philharmonic that night. And he did so triumphantly. And of course, that conductor's name was Leonard Bernstein, who mere years later became the legendary principal conductor of the New York Philharmonic. Sometimes these stories happen in sports. Probably the most famous example is the New England Patriots in 2001 and their star quarterback, their beloved quarterback by the name of Drew Bledsoe, a quarterback who was playing very well until he had a catastrophic season-ending injury, and that forced the backup quarterback, Tom Brady, to fill in. And he did all right, but he got better as the season went along, and of course he got better as the years went along. And if you follow football, well, you know how that worked out. He won 6 Super Bowl championships with the Patriots and 1 more with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He got his chance completely by accident. The person in front of him was doing a great job. Even though the coach, Coach Belichick has said in at least one of his biographies, he was hired at this job and, Bledsoe was already there. He had been there for a while. Bledsoe was not the quarterback that fit his system. Tom Brady was someone who did, and Tom Brady began that year as the 4th string quarterback, and through his own work ethic, through his own diligence, he worked his way up to being the 2nd on that depth chart. And so when opportunity was available, he was there. He had done the work to do that. So there's a lot of variations in this story, but the one that I want to come back to is Lyadov and Stravinsky. If you are a professional musician or you aspire to be a professional musician, you're going to have an opportunity. You may not know how big of an opportunity it is. I don't think Stravinsky knew what the Firebird was going to lead to. I don't think he saw Rite of Spring coming 3 years later. John Williams certainly had no idea what the Reivers was going to bring about. Again, that's a film that I'd be surprised if more than 5% of you have heard of, and more than maybe 1 or 2% of you have actually seen. But I bet all of you have heard all of those films, or most of those films that he's done since then. And again, you probably don't know Lalo Schifrin the way you might unless you're really into film music and you have just kind of dug into the history, and maybe you noticed the score for things like Bullet or Dirty Harry or the Mission Impossible theme. And Anatoly Lyadov, you have to kind of dig around to find his music. If you go look at what's available for these 2 composers, Lyadov and Stravinsky, you scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll on Stravinsky, and then Lyadov, not quite as much. So when such an opportunity strikes for you, what can you do to make sure that you end up being Stravinsky in the story and not Lyadov? So the first thing is that if you're a performer, you need to practice every day and every week with the same intensity that you would if you had a pending performance. So when you're practicing your piece of music, imagine that you need to perform that in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Not like you've got all day. You've got all year to learn it. And similarly, I would say if you're a composer, you need to write with an intensity that matches the type of intensity that you would have to do if you were on commission. Because one thing we know from not only these stories, but similar stories, and also I know this from my own experience in the past, it's hard to suddenly change what you normally do day by day. If you're used to practicing a certain amount and then you have to change that, or if you're used to composing a certain amount, then you have to change that, that's very hard to do. It's a lot easier to take what you're doing already and just apply it professionally. So that's the first thing you want to do to be Stravinsky, because Stravinsky was writing a lot. He was composing very vigorously. He didn't start doing it once he got the opportunity. I don't know what Lyadov's schedule was, but he's not very prolific. So I suspect that he didn't compose very often, so he wasn't ready to compose on the schedule that was needed when opportunity strikes. So set the habit before you need it of the intense amount of work that you need to do to come through on these big opportunities. The second thing, we recently just had an episode on doing technique through excerpts. So this is a similar advice. If you are a performer, learn all of your excerpts. Learn all of the hard music for your instrument that you can, so that you can demonstrate that you know it, and also so that you have developed the technical proficiency that you need when the opportunity comes. For you composers, very regularly study scores, improve your theory, improve your knowledge of composition. You want to be so prepared if you're a composer that when it's time that you can just get the pencil moving and just do the work. You don't have to wait for inspiration. I think this is what happened with Lyadov. He was waiting for the right idea. Stravinsky just got the paper moving and just kind of trusted his craft. Another aspect here is don't underestimate the power of networking. And this comes in different ways. Stravinsky, by all measures, was an extrovert. You could always find him at parties. You could always find him being the life of the party. He met a lot of people. He was very engaging, very charismatic, and it wasn't hard for him to get referrals. Someone like John Williams is absolutely an introvert, but he was always willing to meet with people. He was always very accommodating to whoever he worked with. And so in his own way, he was always very engaging. So if you desire to be a professional musician, we still live in an era where who you know matters as much as what you know, if not more. And you don't get to know the right person without meeting a lot of other people that you may not need to know. You've got to do the work of networking if you want to succeed, honestly, just about in any big opportunity in any field. Another thing to remember in all of this, and this is kind of the big lesson, this is a quote that is attributed to the Stoic philosopher Seneca. Luck happens when preparation meets opportunity. Opportunity without preparation is what leads you to be Lala Schifrin or Anatoly Lyadov in the story. It's the preparation when the opportunity comes that allows you to be Stravinsky or John Williams. So 2 more things that you can do that are related to each other to end up being Stravinsky in this story or John Williams is this concept of under-promise and over-deliver. So what you say that you'll do needs to be less than what you actually do. If you tell someone, I'm going to get you this by February 1st, you need to have it ready as far in advance of that date as you can. Whether it's a piece that you're practicing or a piece that you're composing. And so one good way to do that is to set a personal deadline for yourself that is much sooner than what the client has given you. If you do all these things, if you prepare with the intensity that you need for the opportunity, you keep working on your knowledge, you keep studying, you do some networking, you make yourself engaging and easy to work with, and you underpromise and overdeliver, well, you're going to be successful. You don't know what that opportunity will lead to. For every John Williams and Stravinsky, there are many very talented, hardworking people who met their opportunity, but that opportunity just didn't lead to the same bigger opportunities down the road. That part you can't control. That is the luck side of it. There's no reason at all that you should be Anatoly Lyadov in this story and just kind of fade into the footnotes of classical music history instead of being someone who Google might suggest for good reason as a likely candidate for the greatest composer of an entire century. And one last thing I want to leave you with before we wrap up here. I've done another podcast. It's not active lately, but there are several episodes that exist out there. I believe there's about 80-something episodes called Life in the Pit. It is mostly a interview-based podcast where I talk specifically to musicians who have played in the pit for musical theater productions. And after it had been out for a while, I started talking to those who had done Broadway tours, who had actually played in Broadway houses. So people who had been as successful as you can be within that little niche field. And it's amazing how many of them told me that they got their first big opportunity because of someone else not being prepared for the opportunity, and that they were prepared for the opportunity. And they all told me that networking was important. If you listen to several episodes, you will hear that story more than a few times. So I hope that you got something out of all of these stories of one person not being ready and the other person being ready. And I hope that you will take advantage of all of the things that we talk about on this podcast of how you can do a better job of being ready Going forward, this podcast is going to be quite a few more solo episodes, kind of like this one, that really concentrate on how you can get better at the aspects of musicianship that you need to become the best musician possible. But it's up to you to commit to the work and to do the types of things that are necessary for you to succeed. But I do believe that you can do it. And that's going to wrap up today's episode. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much, and please click like on this video and hit subscribe if you haven't already. If you have not left a rating or review and you're listening on a podcast, that would be greatly appreciated. It does help the algorithms. If you're a music teacher and you want to improve your whole situation with not dealing with invoices and not having to schedule students manually and collect payments and all that, check out Fonz. It's in the show notes. And again, that's going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.